That was on me. I did that. Turned it off. Thought I was turning it on. So when Jesus left the earth, he gave what is called the Great Commission. If you're not familiar with that, it's kind of the marching orders for the believers that were left for the church. And the Great Commission says we are to make disciples, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, going to the ends of the earth to do so, right? And so important. That's what we do here. And the mission of Hulen Street Church is inviting the people in our circles to find their place in our family and their part in God's story. And if you're visiting Hulen Street, you're looking for a new church home, let me just give you a word of advice. Every time you visit a church, you really find out what that mission is. I mean, that's one of the first questions you should ask. And you should be able to find the Great Commission somewhere in that mission statement, because that's what we're supposed to be doing. That's what we're always supposed to be doing. That hasn't changed in 2,000 plus years. And the way we have worded that here at Hulen Street is inviting the people in our circles to find their place in our family and their part in God's story. And so we take that very seriously, and we have for years. And here's the thing, though. I think sometimes we talk about the Great Commission and what our job is, what our mission is that we immediately go to places elsewhere, right? We think about the neighbor across the street, people we have to go to, right? We think about the coworker across the hall. We think about the people across the world, right, that we need to go. And we spent time and energy and money and strategy in order to take the message of God's love to people that live all the way around the world. But sometimes I think we forget that there are potential disciples not just at the ends of the earth, but who are sitting on the ends of our couch, right? There are potential disciples that are outside of our home and potential disciples inside of our home. And so we're so concerned with going and telling that sometimes we forget and often overlook the ones that are nearest to us. And we need to take that seriously. And so we want to hold both of those and make sure we're doing a good job in both ways. And so that's what we talk about here. That's why we come to this. And we do this once a year. We call it Orange Sunday, because this is something that we want to do. We want to help our parents become the primary disciple makers of their children. And we think that is so vitally important to the kind of the transference of faith to the next generation. Because you need all the help we can get here. I know that here's the thing we can't do, right? We can't just assume that church attendance is enough. If your kids, if they are only encountering faith in church and they are not having a faith that is encouraged in the home, that faith will not survive once they leave the home. There's going to be a moment where they're going to go off and they're going to make their own decisions, and they're going to kind of have that autonomy and that independence finally, and you're going to move from a position as a parent of authority to one of influence. And we want to make sure that when that happens, that they're making their own decisions, charting their own way, that faith is still vitally important to them. And so we want to make sure that the way we do that, and the way we think that's best done, is when the parent takes on that responsibility. Now, you think that's a lot of responsibility, and there's a lot of people that are intimidated by that. They're fearful of that. I'm going to tell you, you don't have to be, and I'm going to tell you why, okay? We want to help you to do that. We want to equip you, serve you, resource you. We want to remove the mystery of it. We want to give you a sense of confidence in it, and we want to come along beside and support you through it. The thing is this, right? The church, for all of its well-meaning intentions, right? The church has often been the barrier to parents becoming the primary disciple makers of their children. The church has been the barrier, the one that has gotten in the way of parents actually doing that. I see, because what the church has done in the past is we've created these age-graded ministries. Like we have, and we do this too, right? We get it, all right? We're part of this too, where we have the preschool, and we have the grade school, and we have the student ministry. There are those out there right now that are saying, hey, we need to get rid of all of that, right? That's actually something we need to abolish, because that does not help the parent do what the parent's called to do. And I can see where that argument is coming from, but at the same time, I think that we can have a little bit of both, where the church doesn't just get in the way of the parent, because the barrier is this. When we created those things, the unintended consequence is we sent the subtle message that it's up to the professionals to do the job of transferring the faith to the next generation, right? So what we say is, and it's not the message we want to send, but maybe it's the message that a lot of people have received, is that you just bring your kids. Make sure they're on time. Get them to your class on time, and we'll do the rest, right? Make sure they're here for Wednesday nights for students. Make sure they're here Sunday morning for kids in preschool, and we'll do the rest. Leave it to the professionals to transfer the faith. So we'll teach your kids about Jesus. You don't have to worry about it, right? And we still have those ministries, but those ministries don't exist to replace the parent. They're there to support the parent, to equip the parent, to be a partner with the parent. And let's just be honest, there are some instances in which that and it's the last case scenario, right? It's the break the glass emergency when there is not a parent that's available or willing to be that person in the child's life. And the church needs to step in that moment, and that's where you come in, right? I'm a product of that. I grew up in a home. My parents loved me, supported me, were proud of me. I was very fortunate in that way, but they did not encourage me spiritually, really, growing up. They did not discourage my search. They didn't discourage my faith. But they weren't really teaching me. They weren't discipling me. I'm a product of the church stepping in that moment. So I understand that need, right? I get it. Like, I am here today because someone other than my parents took the role that should have been occupied by my parents and helped me to grow in my faith, right? So that's why I'm not willing to throw out all of those things, because we still need those things in those moments. But the best case scenario is if we can get the parent to own it, to take responsibility for it. And that's why we want to come alongside and help you do that. And we do that through a strategy called Orange. And so we have Orange Sunday every single year because we believe it's important enough for us to rally around again and understand the reason for it again. So why Orange? Well, Tricia talked about it a little bit before. We believe there are two institutions that God created to help influence the world, right? These two institutions are meant to translate and transmit the message of God's love and the gospel to the world as a whole and to the next generation in particular, right? And those two institutions are the home and the church. And these two institutions play a vital role in the transference of faith to that next generation. And we all play a part in that. We're going to talk about that. So what are those two things? Well, the home is represented by the color red, right? Because that's where love is, right? The home is where we display the gospel through our relationships and our sacrifice and our generosity and just kind of that unconditional love of a home. That's the way it should be. It's not always that way. I get it. But that's what it was meant to be. It's kind of represented by the red, the heart, the love that is displayed, right? It's lived out. The church is represented by the color yellow because the church illuminates, the church teaches, the church reveals, right? That's what we do when we come to growth group. We come here for Sunday morning, we open up the word and we teach, we hopefully shine a light onto some truth, and it affects us and changes us and works on us a little bit. And so we bring those two things together, and what do you have? Well, you have orange, right? Orange is a secondary color. So you have the red and the yellow mixing together, and that's why we wear orange this week. That's why we even have orange in our logo. When I first came to Hulen Street 12 years ago, we redid all of our branding, knowing we wanted to really pursue this as a strategy moving forward, knowing how important it was for us to transmit the faith to the next generation and wanting it to be an all-church, listen, an all-church effort, an all-church initiative that we all, every single one of us in this room, whether you are retired or whether you are a young single, you all have a part to play in the transmission of that faith to the next generation. So we changed the color of our logo actually to be orange. We use a lot of orange around here. You're going to see orange everywhere you look. It's in a lot of our design. And that is intentional because we want you, no matter where you look, even looking at our logo, our public brand, if you will, how people see us. We want people to know this. We are an orange church because we take this so seriously. And it's not because I have red hair. People brought it up again, even this week. 12 years ago, they were asking, is it because you have red hair? Yeah, it's because I have red hair. I'm that self-centered. I'm going to make it all about me. No, it is not. I don't look good in orange, right? That just doesn't really play well. But it is about us being intentional and strategic and to transmit the faith to that next generation in an effective way. Because what we want from our kids is we want our kids not just to know it, but to love Jesus, right? To love Jesus in a way that is compelling and contagious. For it to be their faith, not just our faith. We're going to talk about that in just a little bit. So we want to bring these two things together because, Tricia said it, and this is what's on the back of the shirt. Two combined influences working together will always have greater impact than just two influences. That's what we do. And it's the influence of the home and the church working in conjunction with one another. Not working against one another, not trying to replace one another, but working together in order to help transmit the faith to that next generation. Now, that's a great idea, okay? It's a strategy, but where biblically do we find this strategy? Where, if we are a church whose value is biblical centrality, and that's us, where do we find this biblically? How do we justify this biblically? We find this in a book called Deuteronomy. Let me give you a little bit of background. So God looked at the people called the Israelites, and he said to them, I'm going to be your God, and you're going to be my people. For no other reason other than just he chose them, right? Just for his love for them. It wasn't because of who they were. It wasn't because of their potential. It wasn't because of their power. It wasn't because of their money. There was nothing about them that warranted him choosing them. He just chose them out of his grace. And he says, you're going to be my people, and you're going to be a light to the nations, and I'm going to use you to bring salvation into the world, right? It's a unique relationship with a specific group of people, and they were just chosen for no reason other than it was God's choice, God's grace on them. And so he started with a man named Abraham, and it passed through his family. And so God says, I'm going to make you into a nation through the growth of this family. So it begins as a family unit that becomes eventually a nation of people. Now, there's a moment in which this nation is in a time of slavery, like they are enslaved in Egypt. Many of you are familiar with this story, but Moses, God brings a guy named Moses. You've probably heard about him. Looks a lot like Charlton Heston. He comes in and he leads the people out of slavery, right? He leads the people out of slavery, and God says, I'm going to take you as my people. I'm going to give you a land. Because right now they're a nation without a land. So I'm going to give you a land flowing with milk and honey, right? A land of resources and prosperity and a blessing, And so they go out and and it's a long story, but they end up wandering around in the wilderness for about 40 years. And now when you get to Deuteronomy, they're standing there kind of at the doorstep of their destiny, right? They're about to go into the land God has promised them. Here's the problem. Moses doesn't get to go with them. Because of a mistake that he made, he doesn't get to go in. So when you see him here in Deuteronomy 6, this is his farewell speech. He's talking to his people as he's about to transfer the leadership, right? Transition the leadership from him to a guy named Joshua, and he's talking to his nation. He's talking to his people again, and he's saying, hey, you're going to go take this land. Here's some things you need to know, right? This is his farewell speech. This is some of the most important things he's going to say to them. And so he stands before his people and he says, "Hear, O Israel." He says, "The Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength." And he goes, verse 6, "These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home, when you walk along the road, when you lie down, and when you get up." Here's what's interesting. He says, listen, I want you to love God, and these commands of God are to be on your hearts, and you are to transfer them to your children. What are those commandments we're talking about? Well, the 10 Commandments, which Moses was brought down off the mountain after spending time with God, he brought these commandments. Now, what are those? Now, we kind of get a little confused. We think, well, it's just religion, it's just rules, it's just law, it's just, somebody telling me how I have to live. Listen, those commandments were the parameters of relationship. We talk about this all the time, right? Every relationship you've ever been a part of has had a boundary around it. Whether those rules have been written or unwritten, there were still rules that governed your relationship. And if you step outside of those rules, you step outside of those expectations, you hurt the relationship, either damaging it or even destroying it, right? So you all enter into a relationship with somebody, and there are a set of rules that govern that relationship. There are a set of commandments that set the boundaries of that relationship, and as long as you both stay within those boundaries, everything's good. It's a healthy relationship. That's what this is. God says, you're going to be my people. I'm going to be your God. We're going to have a relationship with one another, and like every other relationship you'll ever enjoy as a human, there's a boundary to this relationship. This is how we're going to be in relationship with one another. And I want you to just not keep this to yourself. You have to tell your kids how this relationship is going to work. You have to tell your kids how we're going to relate to one another. So keep these in your heart and impress them on your children. Those are the commandments he's telling them to do. Now, it says there in verse 7, impress them on your children. And you immediately say, that's the red of the family, because that's what the family's supposed to do. We're supposed to impress them on our kids. Makes perfect sense. But where's the yellow? If that's our biblical justification, where is the yellow in this? Where's the church? Where's the community? Well, it comes in the understanding that he's talking to a people, and they're not just any people. They're not just another country. They're more than a nation. These are a people that because of God's grace in their life corporately, they were greater than just another political entity. They were bigger than just another military power. God's unique relationship with these people, as I said, began with a guy named Abraham, passed on to his son Isaac, and Isaac passes on to his son Jacob. And when he does that in Genesis 28, Isaac is passing the blessing on to his son, and he says to him, may God Almighty bless you, make you fruitful, and increase your numbers until you become a community of peoples. He doesn't say until you become a country. He doesn't say until you become a nation, until you become an army. He says until you become a community of peoples, right? Another way of understanding that, he says until you become a congregation. That's what a community of peoples is. It's a congregation. Now, this was a nation, think about it, that began as a family unit and then grew. And as they grew into a nation of people, they were never meant to be just another country. From the very beginning, they were meant to be, no matter how big they were meant to be a community. Now, why is that important? Because when you are a part of a community, that means you've assumed some level of responsibility for the other people in that community. Right? If you're part of just a country, well then really my first priority is just for me and mine. That's where a lot of people this is for me and mine, right? My family, those closest to me, I'm gonna look out for their benefit, their best blessing, their flourishing. But if I take seriously being a part of a community, what I'm saying is that they're not just your kids, that on some level they're our kids, right? I'm gonna be living for the benefit and the blessing. I'm gonna take some responsibility for the flourishing of everyone in which I am in community with. Does that make sense? So I'm saying I'm gonna be responsible, not just for me and mine. On some level, I'm gonna take some responsibility for you and yours. And why is that? Because we're a congregation. We are a community of people. So we read, impress them on your children, and we assume he's looking at the parents. But go back and look how it begins. Who does he address at the very beginning? He says, hear, O Israel. He's talking to the whole nation. He's talking to every one of them. And when he says, impress them on your children, he's talking to all of them. He's not just saying, hey, they're not just your kids. On some level, they are our kids. And we all have responsibility. We all play a part. Now, the parent plays the largest part, but we all play a part. And we need you to play those parts. I mean, I love seeing all those people pop up. That's our greatest need, has always been for that, right? For our preschool and our grade school and our student ministry. But as many people over the 2 services that I saw stand up, do you know that we operate every single week with 20 open spots in all 3 of those ministries? Across 3 of those ministries, we still have 20 spots still to fill for both our preschool, grade school, and our student ministry. Isn't that crazy? It's us realizing, listen, we never get to retire from student ministry. You know that? You never get to retire from preschool ministry. You never get to retire from grade school ministry. We all play a part in it somehow, some way. And why is that? C.H. Spurgeon, this old preacher, said it this way. He says, the receipt of truth from the lips of others laid the instructed believer under the solemn obligation to pass on the truth to the next generation. If you are here today and you have received that truth, you've heard that truth, you've responded to that truth, then that puts us, you and me, all of us, doesn't matter what life stage you are in. You're like, I raised my kids, I'm done. You still have more kids that are out there. We are under the solemn obligation to transfer that trust, that truth into the next generation. Now again, it's the parent that plays the primary role, but the church has a part to play. And here's how the metaphor I came up with. And it's not a great one, but it's the best one I could come up with. It's like the relationship between a boxer and the trainer, right? The parent is the boxer, right? The parent is in the ring. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again, parenting is not for the faint of heart. Parenting will leave you bloodied and beaten and with tears in your eyes, right? We know this, all right? Parenting is hard, it's tough, it's awesome, but at the same time, it's a grave responsibility. It's huge, right? But the church, right, the rest of us, we're like the trainer. And we're in the corner. We're in the parent's corner. So the parent goes in, is they're the one having direct contact. But the church, what does the church can do? Well, the church can offer guidance. The church can offer coaching. The church can offer strategy. The church can offer resources. And when you come back beaten up and bruised a little bit, the church can offer some comfort, right? Can kind of heal some of those wounds. Right, that's what we're supposed to do. And what the trainer can also do is the trainer can see things that the parent can't because they see it from another perspective, and they can bring wisdom and guidance and insight into those situations, into those issues that the parent can't because they're just so close to it. Right? But the parent's in the ring and the church is the trainer, and they're working together for the victory. And once a week you get to bring your kids and drop them off, and we give you a break. Right? Because you got to have a break every now and then. You do. Every single one of us does. The studies are sobering. They're terrifying. We know that right now, between the ages of 18 to 29, 75% of kids leave the church. 75% of kids raised in the church, when they turn 18 to 29, they start making their own decisions. They decide that the church is not for them. They decide the faith is not for them, and they leave the church. Another study was done, and they asked the question, what was it? What were the factors that were involved that kept the other 25% connected? Here's what's interesting. What were the factors that kept the other 25% connected to church, that connected to faith? Number one, these were kids that ate dinner 5 of 7 nights a week as a family. Number two, they served with their family in a ministry. Number three, they had a spiritual experience in the home during the week. Number four, they were entrusted with responsibility in ministry at an early age. And number five, they had at least one faith-focused adult in their lives other than their parents. Isn't that fascinating? Those 5 things. Here's what I want you to notice. Of those 5 things, 1 through 3, where do they happen? In the home. All right? 4 and 5, where do they happen? In the church. It's the red of the home and the yellow of the church working in conjunction. This works. It works. That's why we know it. We see it, and we know it can work. So, impress them on your children. How do we do that? Right? What does that mean? How do we do it? That word impress, it's fascinating. It creates a word picture. That word impress means to either sharpen a blade or to cut into stone with a sharp instrument. Now, either way you cut it, right? Either way you look at it. Both of those are pictures of a positive result that occurs through repetition. A positive result that occurs through repetition. Sharpening a blade, you don't sharpen a blade with one swipe of the whetstone. It's again and again and again, right? You don't chisel in. Now let's go back. Let's lead into the second one though, like cutting something into stone. Because what's the picture here? Moses is saying, hey, these commandments, well, those commandments came down on 2 sets of stone tablets, and those words were etched into the stone. How do you etch words into the stone? Do you do it with one blow of a hammer to a chisel? No, it's the repetition of taking layer after layer after layer slowly away. That's what happens, and that's how it works. You do it through repetition. Something I want to point out. Paul says something, a guy named Paul planted a lot of churches, early Christian. wrote a letter to a church in a place called Ephesus. And in this letter, he dealt with how does faith affect our parenting? How does faith affect our marriages, right? He's asking these questions. And one of the things he writes is this. He says, fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and the instruction of the Lord. Another way of saying that is, fathers, do not provoke your children to anger. Good luck, right? Sometimes all you have to do is walk into the room and you make them angry. I get that. I understand. Why are you angry? You're breathing. That's why I'm angry, right? I get it. But he's talking about something different. He's talking about provoking them to anger. How do you provoke a kid to anger? There's a billion ways that you can do it, but here's what I want to point out to you. Sometimes, and this is, I've been guilty of this. My kids will tell you, I've been guilty of this as a father. You provoke a kid to anger when you swing the hammer too hard. And you try to do it all in one strike, one fell swoop. You want to bring change all in one moment, and you just bring too much to it. And what happens is if you're carving something into stone and you bring too much to it at that time, what happens to the stone? You break it. You break it. So you want to do it. It's a hard work, but there's a sense of gentleness to it and repetition in it. You got to keep doing it. And you're not going to win the battle with one strike. Because if you do, you just end up crushing the kid under the weight of your expectation. And that's how you provoke your children to anger. That's how you exasperate them. So what is the repetition? He does it. He tells us. He sets up the repetition right here. Tell them about these things, right? Talk to them about these commandments when you sit at home, when you walk along the road, when you lie down, and when you get up. Here's what I love about this strategy. When we say we want you to become the primary disciple maker of your children, your anxiety goes up because you feel ill-equipped and you feel insecure about doing that. But even what the Bible sets up here is so accessible to all of us. Look at these things. Talk about them. He doesn't say teach them. He says talk about them. Have a conversation. It's an intentional spiritual conversation. You just got to be aware of it. You don't have to be prepared all the time. You don't have to do a study, right? You just have to be aware of the moments that you have and using them when you get them. So it doesn't take much to have an intentional conversation. And here's the other thing about it. You don't have to create something outside of the normal routine and rhythms of life. He says, when you sit at home, we're going to call that mealtime. Like when you have mealtime, you can have an intentional spiritual conversation. When you walk along the road, we're going to call that drive time. You know, the time your kid's in the car with you, they are a captive audience. They're not going anywhere. You can talk about anything you want to talk about. When you lie down at bedtime, when you go into your room and you sit by the side of their bed at night, and you're in their safe space, you're in their territory, and they will talk to you and say things they may not say anywhere else because you just gave them some time as you sit by their bedside at night when you go through your good night routine. And then when you get up, the morning time, as you start your day together. Listen, it doesn't cut faith out of every day. What I love about what Moses sets up here is that we don't have to pull or try to artificially, let me say it this way, we don't have to try to artificially inject intentional faith moments into our lives. We don't have to try to work something else into the schedule. He's saying, recognize these naturally occurring moments and just take advantage of them. A little while later, Moses says this, and I love the reality of this, right? Just how real this is. A little later, in verse 20, the same chapter of Deuteronomy, Moses is saying, in the future, when your son asks you, what is the meaning of these stipulations, decrees, and the laws the Lord our God has commanded you? He's saying your kid's going to question their faith. Your kid's going to question your faith. What is the meaning of all this? Why are we doing this? What is this tradition all about? Why do we go to church every Sunday? Why do we pray as a family? Why, they want to challenge things, want to ask questions, right? They're going to challenge the traditions. They're going to roll their eyes when you pray. They're going to go, why are we doing this? Look at how Moses tells them to respond. He says, your children are going to question. They've been questioning for 4,000 years. Something about a kid never changes. And they're going to ask those questions. And here's how he says, here's how to respond. He says, tell them, we were slaves of Pharaoh in Egypt, but the Lord brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand. Before our eyes, the Lord sent signs and wonders, great and terrible, on Egypt and Pharaoh and his whole household, but he brought us out from there to bring us in and give us the land he promised us on oath to our ancestors. What do you notice about that? What does he do? When he says, why are we doing this? He doesn't say, because I said so. And he doesn't say, because God said so. Did you notice that? What does he do? He tells them the story of their salvation. Recently I read that the human brain processes information through narrative. That's why story is so deeply ingrained in us. We listen to, we respond to, and we learn from story. That's why Jesus leaned into stories called the parables, because that's how we process things. And so when he says, why are we doing this? He doesn't say, because I said so and because God said so, and that should be good enough for you, son. He just says, let me tell you a story. Now, here's the other thing I want to notice about this. I want you to see this, and I want us to notice before we go. When the child asks, look how Moses puts it, what is the meaning of the stipulations, decrees, and the laws of our God has commanded you? What he's saying is, this is your faith right now. This is not my faith. The son, the daughter is looking at the parent and they're saying, tell me about these things God commanded you, which means they have not internalized. It has not become theirs. They've not taken ownership of their faith. And what does Moses say to respond? He doesn't say, well, I was a slave, or your mom and I were slaves. He says, we. That includes you, my son, and you, my daughter. We were slaves of Pharaoh. But God brought us out before our eyes. He brought us out to give us the land on oath to our ancestors. And he's saying, listen, he's telling them a story, but what he's saying is this: it's not just my story. It's our story, son. It's our story, daughter. It's not you, it's us. Last thing, and we'll go. At the very beginning, we jump right into this because we read impressing them on our kids, and when we sit down and when we get up and when we walk, and all those things, and we get right to the practical part of it, but we skip the most important part of it. The thing that Moses says in verse 6, he says, these commandments that I give you today, first and foremost, he says, are to be on your hearts. You cannot transfer your faith to the next generation unless you have a faith. If these things are not on your heart, if they're not a part of your life, you can't just bring your kid to church and say, here, this is for you, if it's not also for you. There's an old leadership axiom that says very clearly, you cannot take someone somewhere where you have not been and you cannot go. We'll say it again. You cannot take someone somewhere where you have not been or where you cannot go. These things we have to be sure of. They have to be on our hearts if they have any hope of making it into their hearts. Yeah, you can bring your kids to church. And if it's great, I'm great. If they encounter faith at church, that's awesome, right? But if church is the only place they encounter faith, it won't survive. It has to be encountered in the church and encouraged in the home. We have to do this together. Here's the question I want to leave with you. Here's the question I want you to think through. And whether it's about your personal parenting or about whatever role you're playing in the lives of our kids, because we are a community. And as a community, we bear some responsibility for every child. They all are a blessing. And we should play a part in that kid's faith development somewhere along the way. Sometimes it's just a small part, sometimes it's a big part, but we should all somewhere play a part. So whether it's you as a parent or you as a community member supporting and loving these parents and encouraging these parents, here's the question I want us to ask as we leave here today. What is the faith of the next generation worth? What is the faith of the next generation worth? Is it worth you, mom, dad, finally getting really serious about this faith you're wanting your kids to adopt? Is it worth a Sunday or two a month of you getting involved in a kid's life, whether it's student ministry or children's ministry or preschool ministry? Is it you offering to be the babysitter for an evening so a young couple can go out and reconnect with one another so they can be in love with one another and come home refreshed? Because those kids need to see that as well. I mean, there's so many ways we can help encourage the faith of the next generation, to equip the parents that we currently have in our church. What is the faith of the next generation worth? Let's pray together. Father, help us to think through these things and how we can take that next step, how we can, as a people, take on our responsibility, not our obligation, but God, an opportunity to participate in the faith development of the next generation. God, you told Moses, you're telling us, we can take the land, but if we lose our kids, we've lost everything. Help us to remember that. We can take the land, we could be successful, we could be a huge church, but if we lose the faith of our kids, we've lost everything. Help us to remember that. Help us to know that. We pray in Jesus' name.